Because listen, Bobby, I can't prove it tonight. You can't prove it, but intuitively, you look at the spike, you look at what happened with the thimerosal, there is no doubt in my mind, maybe it's 2 years from now, maybe it's 5 years from now, maybe it's 10 years from now, we're going to find out that the thimerosal causes, in my opinion, autism.
You know what? The science is...
So there's Joe Scarborough saying that vaccines cause autism because his kid has a form of it called Asperger's. So big news is that the CDC vaccine panel voted to take the mercury preservatives out of their flu shots. So so just to let you know what mercury is, because it's in your vaccines and not good. And how not good? Well, here, let's find out.
But the reason that it's put into it was actually in the MMR vaccines and some of the flu vaccines is because it's an antimicrobial. It'll kill everything. So maybe that was part of that, because it will kill everything. It will kill the microbes in a petri dish. So because this is one of the realities of vaccine manufacture, which I want your audience to understand, is that vaccines, while it might look like just a clear liquid, in order to make a vaccine, you have to have either a cow that you put ulcers on and scrape the pus off, or you can evolve it as it had evolved to maybe getting some tumorous cells that came out of a Cocker Spaniel's kidney, or monkey balls, or monkey kidneys, and you plate those cells out, and then you inoculate it with what you want to grow to put in your vaccine later. But in order to keep those cells alive, you have to put animal blood on it. You have to put different nutrients on top of it. You have to put antibiotics, kanamycin, things like that related to the COVID. Here, mercury. Okay, so in the end, you can make sure when you have your final product that if you put a little bit of mercury in there, that it's less likely for any of the fungus or the spores or the bacteria or the adventitious viruses that you didn't know about that were there before will be in your final product. Wonderful. So you have a product now that you can be not completely sure has any of these deadly microbes, but now has mercury, which the only places it's actually okay to have on the planet, mercury, is in vaccines, your tooth, or toxic landfill. So if you were to drop a vaccine at a vaccine clinic onto the floor, the hazmat guys will come in. You're not allowed to just pick it up if it's a mercury-containing vaccine. The hazmat people have to come and take that away. Yet we're okay to take a portion of that vial and inject it into a child, a 3-month-old child. How does that work?
It doesn't sound logical.
Doesn't sound logical. So let me bring in Mary Holland. She's author, speaker, and CEO of the Children's Health Defense, an organization focused on legal strategies to defend children's health and obtain justice for those injured. Before joining the Children's Health Defense in 2019, she taught at NYU School of Law for 17 years and lectured at Columbia Law School on international human rights advocacy. Welcome back to the show, Mary Holland. Hi, Mary.
Great to be here.
So this is a big deal, right? That they're getting. So now they had taken the mercury out of most of the flu shots, but there was still in some of them. Why would they take it out of most, but not all of them?
Exactly. So they took it out as a preservative in 2001, except in the flu shots, in multi-dose vials. And as Suzanne Humphreys were just explaining, to kill bacteria, because they'd open it and give one dose, but they'd still have 2 or 3 more doses to give. At this point, it was down to 3%, but it wasn't 3% from 2001 until now. It went down gradually, the amount of mercury being taken out. And this is a 30-year battle, Jimmy, that's now been ended, which is fantastic. Mercury should never have been in vaccines, I think, as you can appreciate from what was just said. It's an incredibly toxic substance, and we were injecting it into, infants, day-old babies in the hepatitis B shot before they took it out.
And so the mercury in the vaccines, it's called thimerosal, correct?
Right. It's called thimerosal. It's half ethyl mercury by weight. So 50% of thimerosal is made by Lilly, was never properly tested, and it started to be used. And literally what some of the people at the CDC acknowledged was they just never added up the cumulative amount of mercury that these kids were getting in the various shots. After 1986, when Congress gave a liability shield, the number of vaccines escalated dramatically, and a lot of them contain mercury. They also contain aluminum. There's a synergistic effect between mercury and aluminum, and a lot of neurological injuries went along with this rise of the use and the number of vaccines.
And I remember a time when cable news hosts used to thank RFK Jr. for fighting this to try to get mercury out of vaccines, and specifically thimerosal. In fact, here's a video. This is going to be a little loud, so bring it down a little bit. Here is RFK Jr. speaking with Joe Scarborough when he hosted a show called Scarborough Country on MSNBC. Let's watch.
My son, born in 1991, has a slight form of autism called Asperger's. But it seemed, and again, when I was practicing law and also when I was in Congress, parents would constantly come to me and they'd bring me videotapes of their children, and they were all around the age of my son or younger.
The generation,
something happened in 1989.
Exactly. The generation, what happened was the vaccine schedule was increased. We went up from receiving about 10 vaccines in our generation to these kids received 24 vaccines. And they all had this thimerosal in them, this mercury, and nobody bothered to do an analysis of what the cumulative impact of all that mercury was doing to kids. As it turns out, we are injecting our children with 400 times the amount of mercury that FDA or EPA considers safe. A child on his first day that he's born is injected with a hepatitis B shot. Under EPA guidelines, he would have to be 275 pounds to safely absorb that shot.
And yet we're just constantly pumping our kids with these vaccines.
Right, and what happened was that in 1988, 1 in every 2,500 American children had autism. Today, 1 in every 166 children have autism.
And now today, it's 1 in 31.
31. It's 1 in 31. It's 1 in 12 and a half boys, Jimmy, in California. And since there was this secret meeting about what do we do about thimerosal back in 2000, we just did a retrospective on this 25 years later. You know, the increase in autism is 350% since 2000. So the CDC has been absolutely had its head in the sand. And it's so interesting to see that from MSNBC, Jimmy, right? After, for a lot of different reasons, MSNBC, you know, would now call that a conspiracy theory.
Yes. And so watch this. It even gets better. There's a little bit more to this video. Okay, get ready, Chris.
And plus, 1 in 6 children have other kinds of learning disorders, other kinds of neurological disorders, speech delay, language disorders, ADD, hyperactivity, that all seem to be connected, that are all connected, the science shows are all connected to autism.
You know, Bobby, what we've always found, you and I could debate 1,000 different issues, whether it's Terry Schiavo or the environment. I think would agree on the environment. But in this case, you've got the federal government coming in saying, well, there's no good science. And of course, in politics, science always gets diluted. Why hasn't the federal government stepped up and worked more? Because listen, Bobby, I can't prove it tonight. You can't prove it. But intuitively, you look at the spike, you look at what happened with the thimerosal, there is no doubt in my mind, maybe it's 2 years from now, maybe it's 5 years from now, maybe it's 10 years from now, we're going to find out that the thimerosal causes, in my opinion, autism.
You know what? The science is...
So there's Joe Scarborough saying that vaccines cause autism because his kid has a form of it called Asperger's, and it all exploded in 1989 when he would have hundreds and hundreds of parents coming with the same age, and it all started in 1989, same age kids with these autism and Asperger's, and he's saying we're going to prove it, not today, not tomorrow, but someday, that this is caused by thimerosal, which is another way of saying it's being caused by the vaccines we're giving our children. That's what Joe Scarborough used to say. John Stewart used to thank RFK Jr. on behalf of the parents for doing this kind of work. That's all over because that was before Big Pharma completely controlled the narrative. And now they fund Joe Scarborough to the tune of 70% of his paycheck. I'll go take it where you want, Mary.
Yeah, I think that things drastically changed after Obamacare. Back in the early 2000s, this was not really a partisan issue. If anything, the Democratic Party was more favorable to this than the Republican. Now there's been a complete reversal on this. And unfortunately, it's become a very partisan issue. And Bobby Kennedy is now serving in Donald Trump's administration, in a Republican-dominated administration, and really trying to get the science done. And what Bobby Kennedy has said, he's acknowledged this 1 in 31, this is federal data. And he's told us in his first press conference as Secretary of HHS that by September, we would start to really understand. He would give us some information about what the science says. And what he's trying to do right now is really analyze massive amounts of data that he has access to within HHS to prove, what happens after a kid gets Hep B or HIV or DPT or polio or MMR. What is if you can show that with Medicaid records, you can show that with federal data.
So I'm going to show you how this corporate news covered this, them voting to take the mercury out of the flu vaccine. I'm going to wait till you see how they cover it. But before this, I'm going to show you a 10-second clip from Dr. John Campbell. He's going to give you a little information on the flu vaccine and how good it is. Let's listen.
If you want to watch, a large study at the Cleveland Clinic found out that the flu vaccine, the influenza vaccine over last winter, wasn't that effective. In fact, it had a negative efficacy of 26.9%. In other words, if you took this flu vaccine, you were 26.9% more likely to get influenza.
Okay, yippee. So that's their great flu vaccine, which the fact that they're allowed to use the term vaccine is mind-bending, right? Mind-bending, because not only did last year's vaccine not prevent you from getting it, it made it more likely that you would get it.
And this was a huge study, Jimmy, of all of the employees in the Cleveland Clinic. And, it was some who took the shot and some who didn't. And so this is really definitive information. And in a good year, Jimmy, these are only up to about 50% effective. And then you have all the risk of adverse events from the shots. So, we just don't have this right yet. That's clear.
So here's how the corporate news, here's from CNBC. Here's how they covered the vote at the CDC to take mercury out of the vaccines. A revamped government panel of vaccine advisors with newly appointed immunization skeptics has voted against a mercury-containing shot ingredient that the anti-vaccine movement has long targeted. The group, called the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices, or ACIP, voted Thursday to recommend annual single-dose flu vaccines to Americans and against influenza shots containing thimerosal, mercury, even though there is no evidence of harm from that preservative. Did you just hear Joe Scarborough?
Correct. Yeah, it's ridiculous. Injecting mercury. Sorry, finish.
Yeah, it was his first ACIP meeting since health. It was the first ACIP meeting since Health and Human Services Secretary RFK gutted the panel and stacked it with new members, including several well-known vaccine skeptics. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention still needs to sign off on the recommendation. If the agency does, it would affect roughly 4 to 5% of the U.S. flu vaccine supply. The rest, so that sounds like, oh, well, that's not a big deal, right? Well, listen to what they say. The rest of the nation's flu shots were thimerosal-free during the last season of the virus. So why can't you make that? So, well, they are doing it. But when it comes to vaccinating an entire country, quote, small percentages matter. Dr. Sean O'Leary, an infectious disease expert with the American Academy of Pediatrics, told reporters last week, and I'm sure he's not being paid off at all by the big pharma industry. If the few thimerosal-containing flu shots were removed from the market, that would inevitably lead to fewer people being vaccinated, at least in the short term, perhaps longer term, and subsequently more hospitalizations and death. I just showed you the biggest study ever, showed you that the flu shot actually makes it more likely for you to get sick. Right. The recommendation also so this is just a liar. And I will guarantee you that this guy's getting money somewhere. This Dr. O'Leary is getting money somewhere to lie to you about mercury in vaccines and the efficacy of the flu vaccine in general. Because the efficacy of the flu vaccine, not good. The recommendation also reinforces longstanding unfounded fears that the substance can lead to developmental disabilities such as so they're saying that putting mercury into a baby is a good idea. That's what CNBC is saying. And that if you have a fear of putting mercury in a baby, remember what the first video said that I showed you, that if you spill a mercury-containing vaccine, you have to call a hazmat team to come pick it up. But you can inject it into a baby. And CNBC says you're nuts. You're nuts if you think there's a problem with sticking mercury into a baby. Kennedy's vaccine skepticism comes full circle with the panel's vote. A decade before stepping into his current role, he published a book that called for the removal of thimerosal, mercury, from shots and linked it to developmental disorders. A very common anti-vaccine talking point is around thimerosal. So that's a very clear strategy to sow distrust in vaccines. let me just show. So that's how the mainstream news and let me just show you one more quick video about how great this flu vaccine is. This is from almost 20 years ago now on CBS News, and of course this woman doesn't work for CBS anymore because she's about to tell you this.
Here's what scientists have found. Over 20 years, the percentage of seniors getting flu shots increased sharply from 15% to 65%. It stands to reason that flu deaths among the elderly should have taken a dramatic dip, making an X graph like this. Instead, flu deaths among the elderly continue to climb. It was hard to believe, so researchers at the National Institutes of Health set out to do a study adjusting for all kinds of factors that could be masking the true benefits of the shots. But no matter how they crunched the numbers, they got the same disappointing result. Flu shots have not reduced deaths among the elderly.
It's not what. So that's your great flu shot, CNBC and Dr. Liar O'Leary. And so that's how they covered sticking mercury into babies. CNBC is all for it because they're completely bought and paid for by the people who profit off of sticking mercury into a baby. Take it where you want, Mary.
Yeah, so that was Cheryl Atkinson, who has recently written a book about science and how it's manipulated. And, you know, that piece from O'Leary is just straight up propaganda. It's laced with lies. Anybody with common sense understands that injecting mercury into a baby is insane. It's just straight up insane. And this has been a 30-year issue, Jimmy. This didn't start yesterday. And it was really rewarding to see Lynn Redwood, who is the first president of Children's Health Defense, speak to the ACIP committee and get this vote that they'd be taken out. She started a group with others called Safe Minds about 25 years ago, 30 years ago, before this meeting when the CDC tried to hide all of this back in 2000. And Bobby Kennedy published the article in Salon and Rolling Stone in 2005, specifically about thimerosal, deadly immunity. And that's when he became persona non grata. Understand that it was when he started talking about vaccines and mercury and the problems, that is when he became, sort of enemy of the media, which was, pharma funded.
Before that, Bobby Kennedy was a hero of the left and the environmental movement because he successfully sued big chemical companies. He got the Hudson River cleaned up, got the PCBs out of and in fact, in 2008, Politico reported that Barack Obama was considering RFK Jr. for a post at the EPA, as the head of the EPA. So that's how powerful big pharma propaganda is, and their money is, that they got a guy who was a hero to the left to be turned into a complete pariah, and most people don't even know why. They have no idea that they've been propagandized and they've ingested that propaganda, and then they vomit it back out in their hatred for RFK Jr. when he's actually the guy sticking his chin out, telling them the truth. But that's a story that's as old as human race. The person who tells the truth is the person who gets their teeth kicked in, and that's what's happening. And people forget that there was a time when even celebrities would speak about it. Remember Jim Carrey would speak about?
Oh, absolutely.
And
Jenny McCarthy.
And Jenny McCarthy. And here's Robert De Niro. Remember he went on the Today Show? Sure. Watch this. You go, watch this again.
It's the result of it's not questioning how some people got autism, how the vaccines are dangerous, if not dangerous to certain people who are more susceptible. And nobody seems to want to address that, or they say they've addressed it and it's a closed issue, but it doesn't seem to be, because there are many people who will come out and say, no, I saw my kid change like overnight. Mm-hmm. I saw what happened and I should have done something and I didn't. So there's more to this than meets the eye, believe me.
Is that the experience you had, Robert? Something changed overnight?
My wife says that. I don't remember, but my child is autistic and every kid is different. But there is something there. There's something there that people aren't addressing. And for me to get so upset here today on the Today Show with you guys means there's something there. That's all I wanted, was the movie to be seen. People can make their own judgment, but you must see it. And there are other films, other things that also just document and show. It's not such a simple thing.
So that's when they were trying to get the movie Vaxxed into the Tribeca Film Festival, and he was out there fighting for it. And then after he did this interview, he got a phone call, and they pulled the movie, and he's never talked about it again because he knows his career would have been over.
He did for a little bit, and then he stopped, Jimmy. He actually went with Bobby to DC long ago. But I want to tell your viewers, we have Vaxxed, Vax2, and Vax3 on our website, childrenshealthdefense.org, goes to CHD TV. I highly recommend, as Robert De Niro said, that people go watch that film and watch the next two, because it really chronicles what's happened over the last 15 years in public awareness. And the last film really focuses on COVID. But yeah, you know, anybody in Hollywood, their career is over if they want to talk about this. It's over.
Hey, come see us on tour. We're going to be in Toronto, Red Bank, New Jersey, Northampton, Massachusetts, Concord, New Hampshire, Oxnard, California, Rutherford, New Jersey, New York, Edmonton, Calgary, and Vancouver. Go to jimmydore.com for a link for tickets.